Good afternoon and welcome back to yet another video cast from Hendy Consulting, the specialist management consulting firm to the $125 billion display industry. And today I'd like to lead you through the first half of our Outlook piece on how to introduce a new material into the display technology. It's really a cornucopia of important hot topics. We've actually got 12 of them, and in this first video we're going to look at the overall opportunities as I see them as of 2023, but also the top 6 of those 12. And in a second part video to follow, we'll go into the second half of the 12 key levers or 12 key topics and talk about things that might be important to introduce a new electronic material into the flat panel display industry. So just as background, we've been working in this area and working with materials companies also as part of the value chain for nearly 20 years. And so what we've tried to do is to distill down some of those key themes on what it is that you should think about when trying to introduce a new chemical or electronic material into the display industry. And here are the 12 issues. And we're going to cover the first 6 of these today and then come back in a second video and talk about the second 6. So the first thing is clearly where are the major opportunities as we sit out in 2023 and look at the display market. The second one then is that you always have to consider each one of these technologies on a segmental basis and think about what you're competing with. And that's important. Number 3 is, and this most players seem to get, but the link between a new material and the equipment needed to deliver it is fundamentally important. And so actually new materials companies have often ended up having to work with the equipment industry also to prove that their material could be deposited with a relatively well-known technique already. Number 4 here is that incumbents have greater chances, and this is a little bit of a salutary tale that on the whole the Asian display companies prefer to deal with companies they already know, and that's just the reality of life. They know how these companies behave, what will happen in bad times, what might happen in good, how they'll behave commercially and technically, and what will happen if things are really challenged. And so breaking in as an incumbent is more challenging. And what it tends to lead you to is try to go into the display industry with a familiar face or through a partner company or by someone who's known at least by the target firms you're approaching, because that makes quite a bit of a difference. What we're going to talk about also then in this first half is the typical adoption process, and then also talk about how persistence is needed in Asia. The customers themselves, through their real worries about employees walking out of the door with data sticks full of data on display technology, have become very strongly siloed organizations. And as a result, if you want to message anything to the display industry, you need to do it very loud, because it's the only way that it will get across. So let's go through the first 6 in this first video, and then we'll follow up with a second video looking at the other points. So where are the opportunities today? Well, I mean, the hottest topic for sure then is anything that's related to glasses, AR and VR glasses, the microdisplays that are concerned of one of sort of 4 or 5 different technologies, but also the light guides and any associated technology, both from a materials point of view and an equipment approach. Those are hot, partially because of the investments that people like Meta have put into the place. Over the last couple of years, Samsung driven, the whole question of flexibles and foldables gave rise to a whole new set of new materials, and those still remain somewhat important. Moreover, the mini LED and micro LED market is really beginning to move from a fundamental R&D basis towards commercialization for micro LED, and mini LED is actually booming quite strongly. And providing a whole range of opportunities for materials and for new companies, particularly in Taiwan, to participate. The long-term trend, at least as far as I've always believed it, is high dynamic range and color gamut that is translated to new materials opportunities, be them quantum dots, be them perovskites, be them new forms of narrowband phosphor, be they QDEL materials, be they new phosphorescent emitters. There is a huge amount of material opportunity related to color gamut and dynamic range. And then finally, there's more to do with pure brightness, and so there has been some real interest recently, and some head-to-head competitions between the LG group and the Samsung group on brightness by thinking about outcoupling approaches, high refractive index materials, and other ways to purely get more light out of a display. So these things are important. Finally, I think Apple pretty much set the tone with LTPO that actually now the display industry is to some degree interested in power savings, and that might move across the industry, clearly in the devices in part of it more strongly, but may have a stronger role. So then to re-summarize that, I mean, in pictures, the foldables category remains important. The next ones are QDs, OLEDs, micro LED emitters. All of these things are very hot and very sexy and providing lots of opportunities for innovation. The whole headset market and the associated waveguides is also providing a huge momentum for players, and wide color gamut and low battery power. And what's really interesting, and I have other presentations on this, is actually the degree to which the interest from the key parties, and here we have the LG Group, Samsung, BOE and China Star as the four main players, across a range of technologies, who is more or less interested in different things. And the answer is they all have slightly different positions in the things that are hardcore of importance to them. I think if you see here, Samsung has probably got the most interest in a broad range of innovations, but actually each company has a range of things that they think that their future innovation may come from, and things that they might be interested in the future. Now, it is important that when you target the display industry that you're quite specific about the specific segment that you're trying to get to. And here we're talking about narrowing it down, for example, on specific players in the small panel industry, which might be a particularly of interest from one particular company, and then also thinking very carefully about what are the other ways that what you're trying to achieve can be achieved. Nearly any change in the display industry can be actually achieved in a myriad of technically other ways. And while people look at direct competitors, it's the indirect competitors that are actually really important and should be considered. I think, as everybody understands, the link of the material to the deposition system really matters, and typically display firms are most comfortable with PVD and CVD as key core technologies. Those ones are very well understood. The use of evaporation using fine metal mask or otherwise open masks is also broadly understood, but by a smaller number of materials. And then you get into a range of other things where actually, while lots of coating is done in the display industry of photoresist, pure dedicated single coaters are not a big thing other than in the color filter shop. So when you start getting into these things, while they are, from an equipment point of view, straightforward, they may not be so straightforward for a display company to really understand what's going on in these process layers. So, you know, PVD and CVD, if you can stick with hardcore technologies and techniques, fine. Evaporation and inkjet printing, more novel. And then some of the other types of tools also more novel. And things like ALD are way out on the fringes because there is no real mass production equipment for some of these. It is worth saying, though, that the incumbent suppliers and the incumbent technologies are, on the whole, likely to be preferred. There is definitely a potential for Western companies to be used as stalking horses to force local Asian firms to do better. And this is a risk for anybody trying to think about the materials industry. So be careful that you think that you've got something and you're even being taken seriously, only for then to lose the business to an Asian supplier who was given some ideas by one of the display firms. This is just simply business in Asia, and relationship matters. And I think what people get used to is it takes quite a long time through the initial process adoption and into R&D, but then suddenly there is a hockey stick as it moves to mass production. So the challenges for a electronic materials management team are quite severe. At the beginning, it seems like everything is going to take forever, and there'll be multiple rounds of trialing a new material. But then when it finally meets mass production, then the question is, do you have the capacity to actually to be able to deal with it? And finally, I think the thing I would suggest is dealing with the display industry is being persistent. The display firms now have set themselves up to be incredibly siloed deliberately so that information doesn't flow freely around the company, because they don't want individuals leaving the firm with data sticks of massive amounts of technical data and walking across the street to somewhere else. So a lot of the display firms have actually become much more managing separate teams separately with relatively less information flow between them. And the implication of that is, if you're dealing with the display industry, you have to market much louder across many channels, in many different formats and different languages, at conferences, in technical papers, and in face-to-face interactions. Don't assume that your one set of relationships with that set of people in materials team 2 is sufficient to get your material taken forward. You need a much broader purvey and outlook on the organisation and how to message to it. So these are the first 6, and we will follow up with a secondary video on the other 6 matters that we think is important in getting an electronic material to market in the display industry. To be continued.